The parking garage was dim and quiet, with only the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Judge Alina Morales moved steadily toward her car, her robe still buttoned neatly over her suit. She had just finished a long day of hearings, and her thoughts drifted to a warm cup of tea at home. The courthouse floors had felt heavy under her feet, but she always found comfort in knowing she had done her duty. Tonight, she looked forward to a moment of calm. As she reached her black sedan, 2 patrol officers stepped out of the shadows. Neither wore names she recognized. Their badges glinted coldly in the light. Alina paused and offered a polite nod, but their faces did not soften. One officer leaned against the hood, arms crossed, while the other tapped a baton against his palm. A sense of unease crept through her chest. "Evening, Your Honor," the taller officer said, his voice low. He glanced toward the wide court. Corridors as if checking, nobody watched. Alina kept her expression calm. "Officers," she replied, "everything all right?" The shorter officer laughed, a rough sound that echoed oddly in the empty garage. "We heard you went easy on that last defendant," he said. His tone carried a hint of accusation. "Your clerk, Jenkins, she's biased, too soft. That's what we're hearing?" He spat the words, and Alina felt the accusation sting. She had always kept her court fair and impartial. Bias had no place in her chambers. Elena's hand went to her bag as if to reach for her phone. She thought to call security or the court-martial, but before she could move, the taller officer stepped forward and shoved her lightly. She stumbled, but held her ground. "Don't be so quick," he said. "We're just warning you." His eyes flicked toward the door. Dull ache began to bloom in her chest. She realized they meant to threaten her. The shorter officer reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper, crumpled and damp at the edges. He pushed it toward her. Alina took it, her fingers brushing the smudged ink. She unfolded it and read the message: "Drop the detainment case, or see what comes next." No signature, no badge number, just a cold threat. Her heart pounded. She looked up. The officers grinned, satisfied with their work. Alina folded the note carefully and slipped it into her pocket. "This behavior is unacceptable," she said, her voice measured but firm. She tried to step around them, toward her car door. Instead, the taller officer struck the side of her vehicle with his baton. The metal dented under the force of the blow. Alina gasped, her breath catching in her throat. The metal creaked sharply, a sudden, painful sound. The shorter officer kicked at the windshield, leaving a spiderweb of cracks across the glass. They laughed together, swapping a glance. As if sharing a private joke, Lena's hand trembled as she reached for the door. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. No sirens approached. No other officers came to help. It felt as if the world had shrunk to this one garage, this one moment of cruelty. When she opened her eyes, the officers were already walking away. Their footsteps echoed in the hollow space. Lena's legs felt heavy, as though she had just run miles. She touched her car, feeling the cold dent beneath her fingertips. A single drop of warm blood slid down her cheek where the baton had grazed her skin. She pressed a hand to the cut, stifling a sigh. Inside her bag, her phone buzzed with missed messages from her clerk and security. She ignored them for a moment. Closing her eyes to focus, she was a judge. She had dealt with threats before, faced angry words and disgraceful actions. Still, this felt deeply personal. Racist words hung in the air, unspoken but loud in her mind. She leaned against the car. Gathering strength, she could not let fear rule her actions.
Oh.
The law was her shield. She straightened her shoulders and pulled out her phone. Her first call was to Sarah Jenkins, her trusted court reporter and friend. Sarah had helped Alina gather evidence in other sensitive cases. She needed support now more than ever. Judge Morales, Sarah answered, her voice warm but alert. Lena heard the concern immediately. "Sarah, I need you to come to the courthouse now. I have something you must see." 5 minutes later, Sarah stepped into the garage. Her eyes widened. When she saw the dent and the cracked windshield, "Oh my goodness," she whispered, moving closer. Lena handed her the note. Sarah read it, her face turning pale. "This is blatant intimidation," she said quietly. "We'll document everything." Together they took photographs of the damage and the note. Alina explained what happened, while Sarah recorded every detail on her phone. Sarah's hands were steady, but her eyes shone with anger. Alina admired her calm professionalism. Once they had enough photos, they moved to the courthouse's security office. Inside, they met with Lieutenant Harris, who had worked with Alina. Before, she showed him the photos and handed him the note. Harris frowned, examining the images on the monitor. "I'll pull the garage cameras," he said. "If any of our officers went in uniform, it'll show up there." Alina nodded. She was careful not to reveal too much. She did not want leaks before the investigation started. Harris promised discretion. He led them to a bank of monitors showing every corner of the building's parking structure. Alina watched the screens. Each feed flickered, showing ordinary cars and empty spots. She held her breath as Harris rewound footage to 30 minutes earlier. There, two officers approached her car, leaned in close, vandalized it in seconds, and walked away. The camera angle was wide, their badge numbers obscured, but their silhouettes matched the uniforms at the scene. Harris froze the frame. Sarah snapped a photo of the screen. "We have a record," Harris said. "I'll have to run this against patrol assignments tonight, but it's a start." Alina exhaled slowly. The room felt warmer now, less suffocating. She trusted Harris and Sarah. They would find the truth. She thought of the crumpled note in her pocket, its message more frightening than the vandalism itself. The officers had asked her to drop a detainment case she was scheduled to rule on tomorrow. That case concerned a young man held for a protest-related arrest. She could not ignore this attack. To do so would betray her oath. Later, back in her chambers, Alina sat at her desk. The overhead lights were soft, but her mind was sharp. Composed a brief memo to the chief judge, detailing the incident without sensational words. She attached photos and asked for an independent inquiry. She copied Sarah on the email, ensuring all evidence was preserved outside the police department's chain of command. She paused, staring at the image of her damaged car. It symbolized the power of fear, but also the resilience of justice. Thought of tomorrow's hearing, and her resolve grew stronger. Fear could not guide her decisions. The law demanded fairness, and she would uphold it. Before she left the courthouse, Alina visited the clerk's office. Jenkins greeted her with wide eyes. Alina handed her a small envelope. "Keep this safe," she said. "You're part of this. I trust you." Jenkins nodded, tears in her eyes. They shared a quiet moment of solidarity. In that small office, the bonds of trust felt as strong as any gavel. As Alina walked to her car again, alone this time, she felt the weight of the evening's events, but also a sense of purpose. Officers had tried to intimidate her, but she would not be silenced. She placed her hand on the hood, understanding that justice sometimes required courage under fire. When she reached her front door later that night, Alina paused and looked back at the street. The world outside was calm. Inside, she knew, a story of courage and accountability was just beginning. Alina arrived at the courthouse early the next morning, long before the first light touched the city. She moved through empty hallways, her footsteps soft on the polished floor. The memory of last night's attack still pressed on her mind, but she refused to let it slow her. Today, she would build the proof she needed. She passed the rows of offices until she reached Sarah Jenkins's desk. Sarah sat behind her computer, the screen filled with notes and images from last night. When she saw Alina, she stood and offered a steady nod.
"Good morning,"
Sarah said, her voice gentle but determined. "I've been up all night organizing everything." Alina thanked her and leaned in close. Together they spread photographs of the smashed car and the torn note across the desk. Each image showed a different angle, the deep dent in the door, the shattered windshield, the scuffed paint. Alina pointed to one photo. "This shows how quickly they worked," she said softly. "See how the dent runs along the bottom edge?" They aimed low to avoid the security cameras above. Sarah tapped her pen against her notebook. "We need every detail. Let's list what we have so far." Alina nodded, and they began to write. First, the note with its anonymous threat. Second, the damage to the car. Third, the security footage they had glimpsed in the guardroom. Fourth, the list of patrol officers on duty last night. Sarah reached for her phone and scrolled through messages. She had already asked the courthouse security to send the log of which officers entered the garage. Here, she said, showing Alina a printed page. 10 officers signed in between 8 and midnight. 2 of them were on the patrol outside the front doors. The rest were inside or on break. Alina studied the list. She recognized a few names, but the 2 at the front door were unlikely. She traced her finger down the page until she reached the names she did not know. These 2, she said, tapping the bottom entries. They're probably the ones. Sarah nodded and circled their names. We need to match those names to the footage, she said. Lena thought for a moment. And we need to get body cam footage from those officers. She paused, her eyes firm. But that request can't go through the regular chain yet. It could tip them off. Sarah frowned. Right, we need an outside investigator. Alina took a deep breath. I'll call the inspector from Internal Affairs. She's fair and she won't warn anyone. I trust her to move quietly. Sarah smiled, relief softening her features. That's good. I'll keep working on the list here. Alina left Sarah at her desk and made her way to the Internal Affairs office on the other side of the building. Corridors were bright now, full of staff moving to begin their day. She passed familiar faces and offered polite greetings. But she did not slow. Her mind stayed on the task ahead. When she reached the Internal Affairs door, she knocked once and entered. Inspector Grace Hollis looked up from her desk. Her calm eyes met Elena's. Judge Morales, she said, standing. I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry. Elena thanked her and set the folder of photographs on the edge of the desk. She opened it carefully. These officers destroyed my car last night and left this note. She handed the note to Hollis, who read it slowly. Threats to a federal judge are serious, Hollis said, her brow tightening. We'll handle this swiftly. Elena sat down, feeling the weight lift just a little. I need you to collect all related footage and records. Body cams, patrol logs, radio traffic, all of it, and do it quietly. If the officers learn we're watching, they might destroy evidence. Hollis nodded. Understood. I'll start. This morning, I'll also assign an officer you can trust to guard your upcoming hearing. Alina felt a surge of gratitude. Thank you, she said. Hollis closed the folder and stood. I'll let you know as soon as I have anything. Alina left the office feeling more secure. Back in her chambers, she found Sarah waiting with 2 cups of coffee. The warm mugs were a simple comfort. Alina sat and took a sip. The bitterness blended nicely with the sweetness Sarah had added. They'll start gathering evidence today, Alina said. Internal Affairs is on it. Sarah nodded again and tapped her pen. I also contacted a local journalist who covers courthouse matters. He agreed to keep an eye on public statements. We don't want false rumors spreading. Lena sighed. With relief? Good idea. We control what comes out. Sarah smiled. We keep it factual and calm. Then the public can support us without panic. Alina leaned back in her chair. All right. Now let's think about the detainment case they threatened me over. She spread the case file on her desk. Inside were transcripts, evidence photos, and depositions from witnesses. Young man held was an activist arrested during a peaceful rally. Alina had seen no sign of violence on his part, yet he had been kept locked up for 2 nights. Now she faced a decision. If she released him, the officers might feel the threat had worked. If she denied it, they would know the intimidation failed. She turned to Sarah. What do you think? Sarah looked thoughtful. Based on the evidence, he should go home today. But that may make the officers angrier. Alina closed her eyes for a moment. She could feel the weight of her choice. Justice did not bend to threats. She opened her eyes and spoke with resolve. We'll rule on the evidence alone. If it says release, then he's released. Sarah nodded, respect and worry mingling in her eyes. Good, I'll prepare the courtroom. For a quick motion, Lena stood, her robe brushing against her chair. Thank you, Sarah. Let's get to work. The morning moved fast. Sarah delivered the motion to the clerk, arranged for witnesses to be ready, and printed copies for the judge's bench. Meanwhile, Hollis's office sent word that they had secured footage from 2 patrol cars and body cam data from the officers. On duty, The files were large and would take time to review. But step by step, the net was closing. Lena left her chambers briefly to speak with the court-marshal. He assured her that extra security would patrol the halls and that no officer would enter the judge's chambers without permission. Alina felt safer knowing her people were watching. When the time came, she returned to her courtroom. The benches were nearly full with court staff and reporters, though cameras were not allowed inside. Sarah sat at her usual spot, ready to record every word. Alina took the bench and nodded to her clerk. The young man's attorney rose and made a brief presentation. Focusing on the lack of evidence and the circumstances of his arrest, Alina listened, her face calm. Then she asked a few questions, clear, precise, and kind. Finally, she announced her decision: the man would be released on his own recognizance. She cited the evidence and the principle that liberty must not be held without cause. The courtroom murmured approval. Outside, Sarah recorded everything and prepared a brief report. Alina felt a surge of relief for the young man. She hoped he would go home today. Later in her chambers, she reviewed the early results from Hollis's team. The dashcam footage showed the two officers arriving at the garage, one carrying a baton, both moving with purpose. The body cam videos were still uploading. Lena watched the first clips, her eyes narrowing as she saw the officers' faces. One had a small tattoo on his wrist. She paused the footage and took a close look. Sarah leaned over and whispered, "That matches the log we saw." "Good catch." Lena wrote a note to Hollis. "Officer with wrist tattoo is suspect to please verify identity." Then she exhaled. The puzzle was slowly fitting together. By the end of the day, Elena's evidence list had grown. Photos, notes, video clips, logs, and witness statements from security guards. She had solid proof that the officers were guilty of vandalism and intimidation. Tomorrow, she would take the next step, moving the case into public view. But for now, she leaned back in her chair, exhausted but satisfied. The system was working. Even when fear threatened, justice moved forward. Alina arrived at the courthouse before sunrise once again, but today the mood felt different. She walked through the main doors. The chatter of early staff and visitors seemed to include hushed whispers about last night's incident. Word had spread fast. By the time she reached her chambers, her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues and friends, all asking if she was all right. She paused to read them and felt a warm wave of support. She tapped a quick reply. "I'm fine. Thank you for checking in. We will seek justice." Sarah Jenkins was waiting by Elena's desk when she stepped inside. Sarah's eyes were bright with excitement and worry. "The story is out," she said softly. "Local radio mentioned it in their morning bulletin, and social media is full of people talking about it." Alina closed her eyes for a moment, taking a steadying breath. She had hoped to keep things quiet until more evidence arrived. But she also knew that public attention could help protect her and the young man she had just released. They reviewed the small stack of printed news reports and social media screenshots. A civil rights group had posted a press release condemning the attack on a federal judge and calling for an independent, transparent investigation. Local community leaders had shared the link, and already dozens of people had RSVP'd to a peaceful gathering at City Hall later that afternoon. One reporter speculated that this incident might be linked to a pattern of intimidation against judges who ruled in favor of protesters. Another blogger praised Elena's calm courage. The tone of most reports was supportive, but a few comments blamed her for making a big deal out of a minor property crime. Alina frowned as she read those lines. Even now, some people preferred to dismiss threats when law enforcement was involved. Sarah placed a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. "We should make a brief statement, just to confirm the facts," she suggested. Alina nodded. She had drafted a short release the night before for the chief judge's office. It stated the basic details: time, place, nature of the threat, and asked for patience while an inquiry took place. But now, with reporters already calling, she needed to finalize it. She opened her computer and typed a few lines, careful to keep the language measured and factual. After a moment, she read it aloud to Sarah, who nodded approval. While Alina signed off on the statement, Sarah sent it to the court's public affairs officer. Within minutes, the judge's words appeared on the courthouse website and were shared on official social channels. Alina watched as the number of views climbed. She felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Public awareness could deter further attacks, but it also risked stirring anger among those loyal to the police department. By mid-morning, the courthouse lawn filled with protesters holding handmade signs. Protect our judges, end police intimidation, and justice for all. At the front stood the head of the local civil rights coalition, Pastor Samuel Clark, speaking into a microphone. His voice was calm but firm as he called on city leaders to appoint an independent investigator. Elena watched from a second-floor window, her heart tightening, knew that the courtroom required her full attention today. But she also understood the power of solidarity outside those walls. Inside, the police union released a statement defending the force. It described the event as a misunderstanding and suggested the officers involved regret any appearance of impropriety. The union leader's words were polished but rang hollow to Elena's ears. "We are committed to maintaining public trust," the statement read, "and will fully cooperate with internal affairs." Elena exchanged a glance with Sarah, who rolled her eyes. Cooperation was the least they could do once public pressure built. As the crowds gathered below, Elena prepared to step into the courtroom for a hearing on an unrelated civil matter. Reporters swarmed the entrance, cameras poised, microphones out. Elena slipped in through a side door to avoid the flash of bulbs and the shouted questions. In her chambers, she took a moment to breathe, reminding herself that her duty here was to administer justice impartially, regardless of the turmoil outside. When she entered the courtroom, she offered a gentle nod to the clerk and took her seat on the bench. The audience hushed instantly. Elena called the session to order and guided the matter forward with her usual clear, kind manner. As the lawyers presented their arguments, Elena remained focused on the law, yet her mind kept drifting to the protesters. Below, to the note in her pocket, to the officers under investigation. This tension only strengthened her resolve to rise above fear. After the hearing ended, Elena returned to her chambers. A heavy folder sat on her desk. Transcripts of body cam footage, newly delivered by Inspector Hollis. Elena opened the first pages and glanced at the still frames showing the officers at the scene. One image captured a tattoo on the wrist of one officer, just as Elena and Sarah had spotted. On another page, the note's message appeared in clear text. Elena felt a surge of gratitude for the thorough work of internal affairs. Sarah walked in carrying 2 cups of tea. She set them down and pointed to the folder. "We have everything we need," she said softly. Elena smiled gratefully. Together, they reviewed the evidence, marking the key details: the officer's arrival time, the damage pattern, the threatening language. Each fact was another brick in the case they would build. Outside the window, Pastor Clark's rally concluded with cheers and applause. Some protesters carried banners asking for city officials to attend a special meeting on police accountability. Elena wondered whether the mayor would respond. A clerk poked her head in to say that the mayor's office had called asking to meet. Elena exhaled slowly. She recognized this as a pivotal moment. If she met with city leaders now, it might appear she was politicizing her role. If she refused, she risked losing a chance to push for justice. Elena paced her chambers, Sarah at her side. "What do you think?" Elena asked, her voice quiet. Sarah thought carefully. "If you meet, you should stick to the facts and insist on fairness. Make it clear this is about upholding the law, not politics." Elena nodded. "Agreed." She sat at her desk and wrote a brief acceptance. She would meet with the mayor, but only after the evidence review and before any formal charges. Bye. Late afternoon, Elena found herself in the mayor's office, seated across from the mayor and his chief of staff. The mayor, a tall man with kind eyes, offered condolences. "Judge Morales, what happened should never happen to anyone," he said. Elena thanked him and presented a concise summary of the evidence. She spoke without emotion, focusing on the facts. 2 officers vandalized her car, left a threatening note, and were under investigation. She asked the mayor to ensure that internal affairs had full independence and that no one interfered with the process. The mayor listened intently, nodding. He assured Elena that he supported an independent inquiry and would issue an executive order protecting judicial officers from intimidation. Elena felt a wave of relief. She thanked him and left the office with a firm handshake. Back at the courthouse, Alina and Sarah returned to their workspace. They sent a joint update to the Civil Rights Coalition, Pastor Clark, and the court reporter who had covered the rally. They kept the message brief and factual. The judge had met with the mayor, and an independent order was in place. They asked for patience as the inquiry continued. As evening approached, the courthouse lights glowed softly through the windows. Alina gathered her things to leave, glancing once more at her dented car visible through a rear window. It looked a little less menacing now that the day's events had unfolded. She felt gratitude for the people who had stood with her, Sarah, Inspector Hollis, community leaders, even the mayor. Justice, she knew, worked best when many hands joined to lift its burden. As she walked toward the exit, Alina vowed to carry this lesson forward, that the law must be defended not in silence, but with courage, truth, and the help of those who believe in fairness. The night had been dark, but the day's light had revealed the path ahead, and in that path lay the promise of real change. The next morning, Judge Alina Morales took her seat on the bench with calm authority. The courtroom was quiet as people waited for the detainment motion hearing. Sarah Jenkins sat at her desk, papers organized neatly. Alina felt a pulse of gratitude. For Sarah's steady presence, the young man's attorney stood ready, and Alina read the files once more before speaking. Alina called the courtroom to order and listened as the attorney laid out the key facts. He spoke of the rally, of the peaceful protest, and of how his client was arrested without clear cause. Alina asked questions, keeping her voice gentle but firm. She wanted everyone to understand that the law must protect fairness. When the attorney finished, she reviewed her notes in silence. Just then, her clerk passed her a fresh envelope. Inside was a brief memo from Inspector Grace Hollis. It said that new audio evidence had emerged from one officer's body cam. Alina paused, her heart quickening. She excused herself for a moment, stepping down from the bench with the memo in hand. The courtroom murmured, but quieted when she raised her hand. Outside the courtroom door, Alina read the memo in full. The audio captured two officers talking after the vandalism. One said, "We'll say he resisted arrest if needed," and the other laughed. They discussed changing the dashcam timestamps to cover their tracks. Alina stared at the note, astonished. This was hard proof of criminal intent. She returned to the bench, the paper folded carefully in her hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "I have new evidence that changes this case." The courtroom fell silent. Alina described the audio clip briefly. No names, just facts. She handed the memo to the clerk and asked for it to be added to the record. The attorney nodded, and Alina directed the clerk to play a short excerpt in open court. The small speakers crackled, and the voices of the officers echoed in the room. "We'll say he resisted arrest if needed," one officer said plainly. Gasps rippled through the gallery. The judge paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. She looked at the young man's face. He watched with wide eyes. Alina felt a fierce sense of justice rise in her chest. "Based on this evidence," she said, "I find that there was no lawful basis for this detainment. The defendant is released immediately." She pounded her gavel lightly. "Court is adjourned." As people filed out, Alina remained seated. Reporters whispered outside the door. She felt the thrill of rightness. The law had served its purpose. Sarah joined her and whispered, "That was remarkable." Alina smiled gratefully. "It feels right," she said softly.
"Oh."
Everyone can see the truth. Back in her chambers, Alina reviewed the audio transcript more carefully. She made notes of each incriminating phrase. Then she drafted a memo to the district attorney's office, summarizing the case against the two officers. She attached all the evidence: photos, video stills, the body cam, audio and transcript, and the court motion. That afternoon, Alina received word that the DA had opened a formal inquiry into the officers' conduct. They were charged with tampering with evidence, intimidation of a federal official, and vandalism. The two officers were suspended without pay, pending trial. Alina sat quietly as she read the press release on her computer screen. Her chest swelled with relief and purpose. Sarah knocked and entered, holding 2 cups of tea. Alina accepted one gratefully. They sat together in silence for a moment, sipping the warm drink. The afternoon light slanted through the window, casting a soft glow over the desk. "They are really going to face justice," Sarah said. "Your actions made the difference." Lena nodded. "The law is stronger when we stand by it." Later, Alina walked through the courthouse foyer, where portraits of former judges gazed down in silent approval. Each painting seemed to say that courage under pressure had shaped this place for decades. Lena felt humbled to join their ranks. She knew this moment would become part of the building's history. As she passed the security desk, the guard smiled and said, "Thank you, Judge. You did the right thing." Lena offered a warm nod. She stepped into the courtyard, where a light breeze stirred the flowering bushes. The world outside felt open and alive. She thought of the young man she had released, the relief on his face as he walked free. She hoped he would carry forward the lesson of fairness and the power of evidence. That evening, Alina returned to her own car. The dent and cracked windshield had been repaired, but she left one small scratch untouched, a reminder of what had happened. She leaned against the hood and looked up at the sky. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in soft gold. Alina thought of the hours of fear, the hours of gathering proof, and the hour that changed everything. She placed a hand over the scar on her car and then lifted her gaze to the horizon. In that quiet moment, she felt a deep sense of purpose. She would continue to uphold the law, no matter the cost. The police officers who thought they could silence her had only strengthened her resolve. As night fell, Alina drove home slowly, the city lights twinkling around her. She remembered the faces of the people she had met: Sarah, Grace Hollis, Pastor Clark, even the detained young man. Each one had played a part in this day's story. Alina realized that justice was never a solo act. It was a collective effort, born of courage, truth, and the will to stand up when it counted most. And in that knowledge, she found her deepest strength. The day after the hearing, Judge Alina Morales arrived at the courthouse and felt a calm confidence. The morning air was cool, and sunlight filtered through the tall windows. As she walked down the hallway, staff offered nods and quiet smiles. She carried herself with the steady grace of someone who had seen justice done. In her hands, she held the final report from Internal Affairs, neatly bound and stamped official. Alina entered her chambers and placed the report on her desk. She thought back to the moment when she first saw her dented car, to the fear that had washed over her. Now, the pages before her told a different story, a story of truth uncovered, of a system that worked when people stood up for what was right. She opened the report to read the summary. It detailed each step of the investigation, from the security footage to the body cam audio. It named the two officers, described their actions, and listed the charges they would face. Alina felt a sense of satisfaction, but also a solemn duty. This was not just about her case. It was about making sure no judge, no citizen, ever felt unsafe in the name of law. Sarah Jenkins knocked lightly and entered, holding 2 cups of coffee. She set one beside Alina and sat on the edge of the desk. "I have the world's best coffee," she said with a small smile. Alina laughed softly. "I needed this," she replied, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. They sat together in companionable silence, each reflecting on the road they had traveled. "Pastor Clark sent this," Sarah said, handing Alina a letter. It was handwritten, on simple stationery. Alina read the pastor's words of thanks and hope. He spoke of community unity, of working with the police to build trust, and of continuing the fight for fairness. Alina placed the letter in her drawer, knowing she would reread it often. The clerk knocked again and entered with a stack of papers. "Your orders, Judge," he said. Alina glanced at them, several routine orders, but one stood out. It was a new policy she had drafted with the chief judge, a requirement that any threat against a judicial officer would trigger an immediate, independent investigation. She had worked on it late into the night, determined to protect her colleagues. She looked at the clerk and said, "Please enter this as Standing Order number 27. He nodded and took the papers away. Alina stood and walked to the window overlooking the courtyard. Outside, a small group gathered near the fountain. It included Pastor Clark, some civil rights activists, and even a few officers from Internal Affairs. They waved as they saw her. Alina felt a warm glow at their kindness. She waved back, then turned to Sarah. "Let's go down," she said. "I want to thank them in person." They left the chambers and made their way to the courtyard. Sounds of birds and footsteps made the space feel alive. As they approached, Pastor Clark stepped forward. He shook Elena's hand firmly and said, "Judge Morales, on behalf of everyone here, thank you for standing up. You showed us that justice truly belongs to the people." Elena smiled and replied, "Thank you for being here. Without your support, this would have been much harder." The activists and officers formed a circle around them, offering quiet words of appreciation. One of the officers from Internal Affairs, Detective Maria Ruiz, spoke next. "Judge, our team learned a lot from this case. We saw how important it is to act immediately and without bias. We'll use these lessons to improve our work." Elena nodded. "I'm glad," she said. "We all have a role in keeping the law fair." Ruiz saluted lightly, and Elena returned the gesture with a small nod of respect. After the brief gathering, Elena and Sarah returned inside. Back at her desk, Elena opened her calendar. She had scheduled time to meet with the courthouse security team. She also planned to speak with the City Bar Association about giving a talk on judicial safety. She believed that sharing her experience could help other judges feel prepared and protected. Sarah watched her plan and said, "You really turned this into an opportunity." Elena shrugged modestly. "Justice needs to grow," she said. "We must learn from every challenge." Later that week, Elena stood before a group of young lawyers at a seminar she had helped organize. She spoke in clear, simple words about the importance of evidence, the courage to speak up, and the value of community support. The room was bright, filled with eager faces and pens poised over notepads. She described how fear could paralyze even the strongest people, but that truth and law could be stronger than fear. She showed a single photo of her damaged car, the small scratch still visible, and said, "This mark reminds me that no threat can silence justice." After her speech, a young woman approached Elena. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. "Your story inspired me to be brave in my own cases." Elena smiled warmly. "We all need encouragement," she replied. "Remember, you never stand alone." The young lawyer nodded, her eyes bright with determination. That evening, Elena returned home. As she pulled into her driveway, she saw her own car parked under a lamp. The scratch glinted softly in the light. She placed her hand on the hood, feeling the smooth metal and the single rough mark. It felt like a small scar, a reminder of the struggle and the victory. She whispered to herself, "Never forget." Then she stepped inside. Over the next few months, the two officers faced trial. Elena did not preside over that trial. She stepped aside to avoid any conflict. But she followed the proceedings closely. She read the transcripts and watched the public statements. When the verdict came, both officers were found guilty of vandalism, intimidation, and evidence tampering. They were sentenced to community service, fines, and probation. It was a firm judgment, but not cruel. It balanced accountability with the hope of rehabilitation. Lena felt a sense of closure when she read the news. She thought of the officers as people who had made wrong choices, but who could still change. She believed in second chances, just as she believed in justice. She hoped they would learn from this experience and serve their community with honor in the future. One morning, some weeks later, Elena received an invitation from the mayor's office. They asked her to join a new task force on public safety and community relations. She accepted, knowing that her voice could help bridge gaps between citizens and the police. She saw it as a continuation of the work she had begun that night in the garage. As Elena prepared for the first task force meeting, she reflected on everything that had happened. The fear, the investigation, the hearing, the policy changes. The journey felt both long and swift. She realized that justice was more than rules. On paper, it lived in the hearts of people who dared to stand for what was right. She remembered the young man she released, the pastor, Sarah, Inspector Hollis, and all the others who had joined her. They had proven that when people come together, even a single act of courage can break the silence of intimidation.
Stepping
Into the task force meeting, Elena felt ready for a new chapter. She carried with her the lessons of the past and the promise of the future. Her life as a judge would continue, but now it would include a broader role: a builder of bridges, a teacher of courage, and a protector of justice. She arranged her notes on the table and looked around at the faces before her. Each one represented a different part of the community: law enforcement, activists, city officials, and citizens. Alina took a deep breath and began to speak. The voice was calm and clear. She spoke of trust and respect, of listening and learning from one another. She offered concrete steps for dialogue and training based on what she had witnessed. The task force listened, taking notes and asking questions. Alina felt that same sense of purpose that had carried her through the darkest moments. She knew that the real work of justice never ended. It only changed direction. Outside the room, the sun shone brightly. Alina thought of the once dark garage, where her car had been smashed, and how an hour later the world had begun to shift. She smiled, knowing that every day held the possibility of change. With each step she took, she would carry forward the promise that justice belongs to all, and that fear must never win.